Tonight, we drift toward a place where time gently loosens its grip, a cluster of emerald islands softly breathing in the endless blue of the South Pacific. Imagine sand grains whispering beneath your toes, warm trade winds murmuring stories of distant explorers, and lush jungles wrapped in shadows sheltering age-old secrets. You've arrived at the islands of Vanuatu, a place where nature and tradition intertwine like old friends, comfortably tangled, quietly enduring. Before we begin, if this little corner of calm has brought you any comfort, feel free to like the video and subscribe only if it feels genuine to you. No pressure. I'd also love to hear from you. Just drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always special to know we're all quietly gathered here from different corners of the world, like a family, scattered but still connected. All right, now go ahead and dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan or a soft hum in the background, something that feels like home. Nestle in, get cozy, and let's ease into tonight's story together. You start your journey gently swaying on a traditional outrigger canoe, gliding over waters clearer than polished glass, catching glimpses of rainbow-hued reefs below. From this peaceful vantage, it might seem that the islands of Vanuatu have always rested here, tranquil and untouched, far removed from the bustling storms of world history. But beneath the coconut palms and banyan trees, each island tells a story of voyagers who arrived from distant shores thousands of years ago, bringing languages as varied as their navigational routes and shaping cultures vibrant in their diversity. Today, over 100 languages echo softly through village pathways, quietly speaking of a people who learned to embrace their differences long before it became fashionable. But peaceful paradise seldom remains undiscovered for long, does it? Around the 17th and 18th centuries, curious European eyes peered into these islands from ships that seemed as large as floating mountains to the bewildered locals. First came the Spanish and Portuguese explorers, sailing boldly yet cautiously, marking their charts, claiming new territories they scarcely understood. Captain Cook himself briefly brushed against these shores, naming the islands the New Hebrides, as if giving them a different name could somehow soften their mystery. Soon after, French and British adventurers joined this curious dance, drawn by whispers of exotic spices, tales of fertile lands and dreams of untold riches, or at least that's how they wrote about it. For the Ni Vanuatu, the native peoples of these islands, life was about to shift in ways they could never have anticipated. Traders and missionaries soon trickled onto the shores, each bringing their own offerings, metal tools and cloth sugar, and faith. It was a complicated relationship. On one hand, the Ni Vanuatu gained useful items that improved their daily lives, yet on the other, they faced the subtle pressures and demands of outsiders who seemed to believe they knew better. And here's an odd little fact that captures how perplexing this cultural collision truly was. One English missionary famously wrote back home, distressed, that the islanders preferred dancing to hymn singing while conveniently ignoring the locals' puzzled observations about why Europeans seemed so terribly uncomfortable dancing without shoes. As decades rolled forward, whispers of European power games drifted across the islands. Britain and France found themselves awkwardly tangled in these tropical islands, neither willing to relinquish control to the other. Eventually, they arrived at an uneasy solution that would become legendary in its peculiarity, a joint colonial rule known formally as the Anglo-French condominium. Yet locals with characteristic wit would soon rename it pandemonium, highlighting the chaos and confusion created by two rival governments trying, and mostly failing, to administer one archipelago together. And honestly, who could blame them? Picture needing permission from two separate governments just to open a simple post office sounds more like a comedy sketch than colonial administration. Despite the strangeness and often comedic inefficiency, the era of European colonial rule brought serious disruptions. Traditional ways were challenged and reshaped, sometimes gently, often harshly. Ni Vanuatu watched as their lands were divided and redivided on colonial maps, their lives transformed by laws written thousands of miles away in languages they did not fully understand. Yet throughout these upheavals, the people quietly preserved their traditions, their ways of life, and their dignity, often employing subtle defiance and humor. Historians still argue whether the island's easygoing reputation masked deeper resistance strategies, but most agree that the Ni Vanuatu quietly excelled at holding on to their identity even when forced to share their homeland. As tonight's tale unfolds, you'll see that Vanuatu's story of independence was not defined by great battles or loud proclamations, but by quieter, steadfast courage, proof that sometimes true strength whispers rather than shouts. The path ahead is winding and complex, filled with moments of quiet heroism, quirky legends and gentle triumphs that would eventually culminate in one remarkable July day in 1980 when these islands reclaimed their destiny and finally became Vanuatu. So settle in deeper, dear listener, because this journey is just beginning, gently guiding you through a history that hums softly, as comforting and fascinating as the islands themselves. As your journey through Vanuatu's gentle history continues, you find yourself lingering in the era of colonial confusion, the time of the Anglo-French condominium, a governing system so peculiarly unique, locals had affectionately dubbed it pandemonium. Imagine for a moment what life must have been like in this tropical paradise under not one but two colonial administrations simultaneously. Picture yourself walking along a village path barefoot and relaxed beneath gently swaying palms, only to discover that to build a hut, register a birth, or simply get married, you'd need approval from both British and French officials, two sets of paperwork, two bureaucracies, two sets of rules. If this sounds puzzling, exhausting, or just plain absurd, you're right yet. The Ni Vanuatu handled it with their trademark grace and subtle humor, quietly rolling their eyes as foreign officials argued endlessly about details as minor as road widths and market taxes. This strange system came about in 1906 after decades of diplomatic skirmishes between Britain and France. Both empires coveted the islands, each determined not to let the other gain sole dominance. So rather than fight or compromise in a sensible manner, they decided almost comically to run the islands together. It seemed at first glance a diplomatic triumph, a civilized solution to colonial competition. But in reality, it quickly became clear that having two colonial governments side by side made everyday life absurdly complicated. The condominium created parallel legal systems. British subjects were judged by British laws, French subjects by French laws, and Ni Vanuatu had the misfortune of often being caught awkwardly in the middle. The courts unsurprisingly became tangled, especially when locals found themselves accused of crimes by authorities who could barely understand each other's languages, let alone the complex realities of indigenous life. Yet amid this bureaucratic confusion, daily life continued quietly resilient and remarkably cheerful. Markets flourished with fresh produce, piled high banana leaves, shading rows of bright fruit villages, bartering sweet yams and taro roots, unaffected by the squabbles of their colonial overseers. Indeed, the condominium era, while full of contradictions and frustrations, still brought intriguing moments of cultural exchange. Islanders adopted French and British cooking techniques, infusing their dishes with new flavors, while European officials found themselves utterly bewildered by and occasionally entranced with local customs and traditions. For instance, it was said that British administrators couldn't quite understand the Ni Vanuatu's insistence on detailed rituals before even minor agreements, while French officials amusingly documented their exasperation with the slow pace of village meetings, complaining that locals preferred relaxed storytelling to punctual meetings and swift decisions. To the Ni Vanuatu, this was simply common sense after all. What's the rush when the weather is perfect and there's always tomorrow? One quirky, yet revealing example of condominium absurdity was the existence of two distinct police forces. Imagine a small island community, peaceful and harmonious, somehow needing separate French and British police, each with their own uniforms and rules, neither particularly keen on cooperating with the other. The running joke among the islanders was that whenever trouble occurred, the two forces spent more time debating jurisdiction than solving any actual problems. Rumor had it that village elders sometimes deliberately sparked minor disputes just to enjoy the spectacle of colonial officers squabbling, though historians still argue whether this was genuine resistance or merely island humor at play. Education, too, became a curious battleground. Schools run by French missionaries taught in French schools by British missionaries taught in English, and neither curriculum particularly respected local customs or languages. Yet, Ni Vanuatu children navigated this confusion with remarkable agility. It wasn't unusual for a child to speak 2 colonial languages fluently by adolescence, plus 3 or 4 native languages effortlessly at home, casually shattering linguistic boundaries that puzzled colonial officials. One British teacher famously complained in his diary that he couldn't discipline students effectively because whenever he tried speaking sternly in English, they'd nod politely and then whisper jokes about him in French, or Bislama, the ingenious local pidgin language. Naturally, the children found endless amusement in these situations, turning colonial absurdity into their own form of gentle rebellion. Underneath all these humorous anecdotes lay deeper struggles. The condominium was fundamentally disruptive, dividing communities, families, and even individuals against themselves as colonial interests seeped slowly into traditional village structures. Lands were often taken without genuine consent and local governance systems disrupted. Villagers, however, found subtle yet effective ways to resist peaceful non-cooperation, careful negotiation, or simply disappearing into the bush for weeks when colonial officials tried to impose unwanted changes. Through all of this, the Ni Vanuatu demonstrated a quiet strength and unwavering patience, skillfully maintaining their cultural integrity even under considerable external pressure. Over time, the inefficiencies and frustrations of the condominium began to galvanize a shared sense of identity among the islands. What had once been isolated communities started to see themselves as united, bound together, not only by geography, but also by the shared experience of navigating the absurdities of dual colonial rule. Out of this confusion, seeds of unity were subtly planted, eventually flowering into a vibrant movement toward independence. And at the heart of this rising national identity stood quirky traditions and legends that emerged during these strange colonial times, such as the famous cargo cults, a unique cultural phenomenon that blended spiritual beliefs, colonial curiosities, and local humor into movements that baffled outsiders and fascinated historians. But that's a story best saved for the next part of our gentle, winding journey. For now, feel the soft Pacific breeze on your face, hear the faint laughter from a village gathering, and marvel quietly at how gracefully the people of Vanuatu navigated the chaos of their pandemonium era. As we glide forward, remember the charming stubbornness and gentle wisdom these islanders brought to their struggle, embracing confusion with a knowing smile, quietly shaping their path toward freedom. Now, as you drift deeper into the heart of Vanuatu's past, allow your mind to settle on one of the most enchanting and mysterious chapters of island life, the cargo cults. Imagine the stillness of a tropical dawn, birds chirping softly, and the dense jungle beginning to shimmer with light when suddenly a gathering forms, villagers clad in traditional attire, solemnly performing rituals inspired by a blend of old beliefs and the bewildering new world introduced by colonizers and soldiers. One cult in particular, centered around the legendary figure John Frum, stands out like a beacon of curiosity and resilience, revealing the ways the Ni Vanuatu made sense of upheaval and sought hope amidst change. The story of John Frum begins during the chaos of World War II, when American troops arrived on the islands in unexpected numbers, bringing with them supplies, vehicles, and equipment unlike anything the islanders had ever seen. For the Ni Vanuatu, these cargo planes and trucks were nothing short of miraculous, like gifts from the gods. They brought food, medicine, clothes, and machines that seemed to promise a new, better life. But when the soldiers eventually left, the cargo disappeared too, leaving many islanders confused and longing for the prosperity they'd glimpsed. In response, a movement emerged that combined indigenous spirituality with the hope of returning abundance, the John Frum cargo cult. Villagers would build makeshift landing strips, construct wooden planes and radios, and perform ceremonies calling for the return of John Frum, imagined as a mystical figure who would bring back the cargo and restore balance. It's tempting to view cargo cults simply as misunderstandings or naive beliefs, but they are far richer and more complex. They reflect a profound response to colonial disruption and economic deprivation, a creative way of negotiating identity and power in a world rapidly transforming. John Frum himself was said to be a messianic figure, sometimes described as an American soldier, sometimes as a spirit. Historians still argue whether he was an actual person, a symbolic figure, or a blend of both. Regardless, his legend gave the Vanuatu a sense of agency, a belief that they could reclaim control over their future. Today, the John Frum movement survives as a unique cultural expression, complete with annual festivals where participants don striking red shirts and perform dances that shimmer with both hope and irony. Another quirky aspect of these cargo cults is the blending of traditional customs with modern technology, or at least their symbolic representations. Villagers would fashion wooden headphones, walkie-talkies, and even radios, performing rituals as if to communicate with the invisible forces that controlled the flow of goods. Outsiders often misunderstood these practices as mere superstition, but among the islanders they carried deep meanings about faith, resilience, and resistance. One clever local once remarked, "We built the plane not to fly, but to remind the world that we are still here, waiting." It's a poignant reminder of how cultures adapt, inventing new forms to make sense of profound change. Of course, these fascinating rituals were not without controversy. Some colonial officials saw cargo cults as a threat, fearing that the movements could inspire rebellion or disrupt the fragile colonial order. Missionaries sometimes condemned the cults as pagan or backward. While anthropologists debated their significance, are cargo cults primarily religious, political, or social phenomena? Scholars still argue about the precise meanings and implications, but most agree they represent a profound indigenous response to colonialism and globalization. They are living testimonies to the complexity of cultural contact, neither wholly rejectionist nor assimilative, but something uniquely Vanuatu. Meanwhile, beneath the spiritual symbolism, cargo cults also subtly challenged the colonial status quo by asserting that the islanders too deserved the prosperity promised by modernity. This was not a passive acceptance of colonial rule, but a demand for inclusion, however, expressed through ritual and myth. The cargo cults blended humor, hope, and resilience, much like the everyday ways the Vanuatu navigated the pandemonium of dual colonial governance. So as you close your eyes and picture these colorful festivals, you might imagine drums beating softly beneath starlit skies, dancers moving rhythmically with eyes full of dreams, not just for cargo, but for freedom and dignity. As we prepare to follow those dreams into the seeds of independence that began to sprout in the 1960s and 70s, remember that history is never just about facts and dates. It's about people who dance, who believe, who laugh in the face of confusion, and who quietly shape the world around them. And in Vanuatu, those people created a story rich with spirit humor and unyielding hope. As the sun rose steadily over Vanuatu's rugged hills and azure seas in the 1960s, a quiet stirring began to ripple through the islands. You can almost hear the soft murmur of conversations beneath the coconut palms, where village elders and young leaders started to speak not only of tradition and survival, but also of a future imagined beyond the tangled web of colonial rule. This was the era when the seeds of independence were carefully, almost imperceptibly, planted through whispered meetings, fledgling political groups, and the slow awakening of a shared national consciousness. Unlike the dramatic gunpowder-laden revolutions you might have heard about elsewhere, Vanuatu's path was marked by gentle persistence. Islanders didn't rush into fiery uprisings. Rather, they nurtured their aspirations in the shadows of the Anglo-French condominium's peculiar pandemonium. With dual colonial powers at odds, the Vanuatu found subtle ways to assert their identity. Political organizations such as the New Hebrides National Party emerged, advocating for self-rule and unity among the island's diverse peoples. This party, often meeting under the shade of frangipani trees and in community halls, became a gathering point for those who envisioned a Vanuatu free from foreign dominance. One particularly intriguing figure of this period was a man who would soon become synonymous with independence, Father Walter Leaney. Before he was the nation's first prime minister, he was a humble Anglican priest traveling the islands fluent in local languages and deeply connected to the culture and spiritual life of his people. His sermons often blended Christian teachings with messages of empowerment and self-determination, a message that resonated powerfully with Vanuatu communities. Interestingly, some villagers joked that Lini's sermons were so compelling because he sprinkled them with island humor and storytelling, which helped bridge the gap between tradition and modern political ideas. It's one of those charming contradictions that historians still debate. Was Lini's success more due to his political savvy or his ability to weave cultural respect into his message? The 1960s and 70s were also a time when the Vanuatu began to reclaim their languages and customs more openly, often in defiance of colonial educational policies that prioritized French or English. Local music, dance, and oral storytelling flourished in villages, reaffirming a shared cultural identity that transcended island divisions. It's said that some activists cleverly used traditional dance to convey coded messages about unity and resistance, turning celebration into subtle protest. This blend of the old and the new, the spiritual and the political, created fertile ground for a movement that would gradually gain momentum. Meanwhile, the condominium's dual governments found themselves increasingly out of touch with the growing call for autonomy. Their administrative bickering, once a source of local amusement, began to seem dangerously anachronistic amid the rising tide of nationalist sentiment sweeping across the Pacific. Pressure mounted as international awareness of decolonization grew. Neighboring islands were gaining independence, and Vanuatu's people felt the pull of self-governance more keenly than ever. The question wasn't whether they would gain independence, but how and when. In this era of awakening, you can almost hear the cautious optimism in the air, mingled with the quiet determination of a people who had endured centuries of outside interference, yet retained their dignity. The Vanuatu didn't rush the process. Instead, they built the foundations carefully through education, political organization, and cultural revival. They were planting seeds that would blossom into a unified nation, a tapestry woven from hundreds of languages and traditions, but stitched together by a common dream of freedom. As we continue, we'll see how Father Lini's gentle leadership became the guiding light in this beautiful journey toward independence, inspiring a peaceful revolution that still echoes today. The story now turns to Father Walter Lini, a figure whose presence is as calming and steady as a lighthouse beam guiding ships through a Pacific night. You find yourself following this gentle priest as he moves from village to village, his soft-spoken words weaving through the tropical air like a balm for a people yearning for more than the confusing dual colonial rule they had known. Lini was no ordinary priest. He was deeply rooted in the soil and spirit of Vanuatu, fluent in local languages and attuned to the rhythms of island life. But more than that, he carried a vision, a dream of unity and independence that would eventually unite the diverse peoples scattered across these islands. Lini's journey to leadership was unusual and marked by humility rather than grand ambition. Educated in both theology and politics, he understood the power of blending spiritual guidance with political action. His sermons often carried a message that resonated beyond the church walls, gently encouraging his listeners to think beyond the constraints imposed by colonial powers. One of the quirks of his early ministry was his use of island humor and storytelling, a tool that historians still debate as central to his appeal. Some say it was his ability to speak in a language everyone understood, both literally and figuratively, that helped him bridge gaps between different communities and colonial cultures. But Lini's influence was more than just words. He was a unifying force in a land of hundreds of languages and traditions. He advocated for a political vision called Melanesian socialism, which emphasized community equality and respect for the environment, a stark contrast to the capitalist models imposed by colonial rulers. This approach was deeply rooted in indigenous values and provided a hopeful alternative that connected with the daily lives of ordinary Vanuatu. It was no surprise that he quickly became the leading figure in the independence movement, trusted by many to shepherd the islands toward self-rule. One of the more amusing stories about Lini involves his insistence on blending tradition with modern politics. At a crucial meeting when foreign diplomats expected stiff, formal speeches, Lini surprised everyone by opening with a traditional dance and a humorous tale about a stubborn pig that refused to follow the chief's orders. This playful approach confused some diplomats but endeared him to locals who saw in Lini a leader who respected their ways without dismissing the realities of the modern world. Such moments reveal why historians still debate the precise balance between Lini's religious background and political acumen in shaping Vanuatu's independence. Lini's leadership culminated in the founding of the Vanuatu Party of the People, which quickly became the dominant political force advocating for independence. Under his guidance, the party promoted peaceful dialogue and negotiation, rather than violent confrontation, a strategy that reflected the calm and thoughtful nature of Vanuatu society. Yet this peaceful approach was by no means passive. Lini and his supporters skillfully navigated the tricky political waters of the condominium, uniting diverse groups and gaining international support for independence. His work set the stage for the peaceful transfer of power, ensuring that when independence finally came, it would be a celebration of unity rather than division. So as you imagine Father Walter Lini walking softly along a sandy beach at sunset, pondering his next speech or prayer, remember that his gentle strength was the steady heartbeat beneath Vanuatu's march to freedom. His story is a reminder that sometimes the quietest voices carry the deepest power, shaping history, not through force but through understanding, respect, and hope. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore how this quiet determination blossomed into a peaceful struggle and eventually the joyous birth of a new nation. Now you find yourself drifting into the soft, steady rhythm of a peaceful struggle, a quiet movement that grew stronger, not with shouts or gunfire, but with calm resolve and persistent voices. The Vanuatu, led by figures like Father Walter Lini, began to weave a tapestry of peaceful resistance and clever diplomacy, a fabric strong enough to eventually tear through the colonial pandemonium. Imagine small villages, community meetings filled with passionate discussions, but also laughter and storytelling as people gathered not to plot rebellion, but to plan their nation's future. It's a kind of resistance that requires patience, a quality the islands seem to have in abundance. During this time, petitions were carefully written, signatures collected like treasures, and letters sent to faraway capitals, asking, sometimes pleading for recognition and rights. The Vanuatu did not want to alienate the world. They wanted to be seen, heard, and respected. In fact, their approach was so thoughtful that even the colonial powers found it hard to dismiss. The locals' ability to navigate the complex political landscape of the Anglo-French condominium, lobbying British and French officials while also appealing to international organizations, was nothing short of remarkable. They managed to turn bureaucratic frustration into a platform for their voice, often catching colonial administrators off guard with their quiet tenacity. One of the clever strategies involved using the condominium's own absurd rules against it. Since both Britain and France had to agree on decisions, the Vanuatu knew that pushing for changes in one administration could stall or influence the other. Villagers would sometimes exploit these rivalries, lobbying each side separately and encouraging disagreements, all the while maintaining a united front among themselves. It was a delicate dance requiring wit, diplomacy, and a deep understanding of the colonial game. Historians still argue whether this was a conscious political tactic or simply an organic response born from navigating a confusing system, but either way it worked in the island's favor. At the grassroots level, peaceful protests and demonstrations became more frequent, yet they maintained the island's characteristic calm. Instead of mass riots, you'd find gatherings of villagers holding traditional dances and ceremonies that doubled as political statements. These events, while visually stunning and culturally rich, carried deep messages of unity and self-determination. Outsiders sometimes misunderstood these displays, seeing only exotic spectacle rather than powerful political expressions. One witty Vanuatu elder reportedly told a visiting official, "Our dances are our parliament. We speak with feet and voices, and you must listen if you want to understand." The international context also played a significant role. By the 1970s, decolonization movements were sweeping across the Pacific and Africa, and the United Nations was increasingly supportive of self-determination for colonial territories. Vanuatu leaders, savvy and patient, leveraged this global momentum to their advantage. They built connections with diplomats, human rights organizations, and sympathetic governments, steadily raising awareness about their cause. The world was beginning to listen, and the island's peaceful approach earned respect. Through all this, the Vanuatu retained their humor and lightness. Even in the face of political seriousness, there were moments of levity, like the story of a village that sent a delegation to negotiate with colonial officials, only for the meeting to end abruptly when the French side insisted on speaking only in French, while the British demanded English. The locals simply shrugged and invited everyone to a feast instead. It's a reminder that sometimes the best diplomacy is done over shared food and laughter. So as you settle deeper into this tale, imagine the Vanuatu not as victims but as quiet architects of their destiny, patient, clever, and unshakably hopeful. Their peaceful struggle was a masterclass in resilience, proving that the softest voices can echo loudest when given time and space to be heard. Soon, this gentle momentum would carry the islands to a historic dawn, one where Vanuatu would emerge fully sovereign, embracing its rich cultural diversity and unique identity. But for now, breathe in the calm strength of a people who know that true power often lies in patience and peaceful persistence. You now stand beneath the warm July sun of 1980, feeling the gentle tropical breeze that carries with it a sense of hope and renewal. This is the day Vanuatu was born, a nation, stepping into the light of independence after years of quiet struggle and spirited dreaming. The islands, once tangled in the peculiar web of dual colonial rule, now claimed their sovereignty with a calm joy that reflected the resilience and unity of their people. Imagine the streets filling with laughter music and the vibrant colors of traditional dress as Vanuatu from every corner of the archipelago gathered to celebrate not just freedom, but the remarkable tapestry of cultures that made up their new home. The ceremony itself was both solemn and celebratory. Dignitaries and elders spoke, but there were no grandiose speeches dripping with pomp. Instead, words were chosen with care, emphasizing peace, unity, and respect for the land and each other. Father Walter Lini, now the nation's first Prime Minister, stood at the forefront, his presence a steady beacon. He reminded everyone that independence was not an end but a beginning, a chance to craft a society rooted in Melanesian values and traditions, yet ready to engage with the wider world on its own terms. One fascinating detail of that day was the symbolic raising of the new flag designed to reflect the unity and diversity of Vanuatu. Its colors, red, green, black and yellow, represented the blood of ancestors, the richness of the land, the Vanuatu people, and the light of Christianity, respectively. It's a simple design but deeply meaningful, capturing the complex history and hopeful future of the nation. The flag waved proudly as children sang in dozens of local languages, their voices weaving a chorus that celebrated both the old and the new. The transition to independence was remarkably peaceful, especially compared to many other nations emerging from colonial rule. This peaceful birth was the fruit of years of careful negotiation, inclusive dialogue, and a shared commitment to unity despite the island's immense diversity. Of course, challenges remained. There were political tensions, economic uncertainties, and the delicate task of uniting over 100 languages and countless traditions under one flag. But the spirit of cooperation and respect prevailed, setting a foundation for the nation's unique identity. An intriguing and somewhat quirky fact about this period is that the new government, in a nod to the island's colonial past, officially recognized both English and French as national languages alongside Bislima, the pidgin language, spoken widely among the people. This trilingual policy was both practical and symbolic, acknowledging the complexity of the island's history while affirming their commitment to inclusiveness. It also led to some humorous moments, such as government meetings where debates hopped between three languages, occasionally leaving even seasoned politicians momentarily bewildered. Historians still debate how effective this multilingual policy has been, but most agree it reflects the extraordinary cultural balancing act Vanuatu embraced from the start. As the day's celebrations wound down, the people of Vanuatu looked forward with cautious optimism. Independence had been won, but the true work of nation-building was just beginning. Yet unlike many newly independent states, Vanuatu's birth was a gentle one, marked by an enduring respect for cultural diversity and an unwavering belief in peaceful coexistence. This calm beginning set the tone for decades to come, as the nation would continue to navigate the complex waters of unity and difference with a grace all its own. So as you close your eyes and imagine the joyous scenes of July 30, 1980, feel the quiet pride of a people who achieved freedom, not with swords or violence, but with steadfast patience, humor, and an unshakable faith in their collective future. Vanuatu's story of independence is not just history, it's a lesson in the power of peace, resilience, and embracing diversity. And as we continue, we'll see how this young nation managed to harmonize the many voices that make it truly unique. As the newly independent Vanuatu settled into its role on the global stage, the true challenge emerged, not just governing, but weaving together an intricate mosaic of cultures, languages, and traditions into a unified nation. Picture a vibrant quilt, each patch different yet connected, stitched carefully by hands that understood both the beauty and the tension that comes with diversity. Over 100 languages were spoken across the islands, with communities that had lived in relative isolation for centuries, each holding on to its customs like treasured heirlooms. The question was how to build a national identity without erasing these rich individual stories. The government embraced this challenge with a philosophy rooted in respect and inclusion, acknowledging that unity did not require uniformity. Bislama, a pidgin language born out of necessity and pragmatism during the colonial era, became a vital bridge, a shared tongue that transcended linguistic barriers without threatening local languages. Schools taught Bislama alongside English and French, fostering communication while honoring heritage. Community leaders and elders were invited to participate in political processes, ensuring that governance reflected the diverse voices of the archipelago. It was a delicate balance, a dance choreographed with patience and care. Interestingly, this approach sometimes sparked internal debates that still fascinate scholars today. How much centralization is too much? Should certain customs be prioritized over others? Some argued that the nation's commitment to cultural pluralism slowed economic development, while others see it as the very foundation of social harmony. For example, the concept of custom, the traditional customs and laws that govern daily life, holds immense influence. Custom varies from island to island and sometimes village to village, yet it remains a living, breathing part of the national fabric. The government recognized custom not as an obstacle, but as a cornerstone, integrating it into legal frameworks where possible. This respect helped prevent the cultural erasure common in many post-colonial states. At the grassroots level, festivals and ceremonies flourished, celebrating the island's diversity with joyous color and rhythm. The Nagriamel movement, for instance, was a unique cultural political force that blended tradition with modern activism, advocating for land rights and local autonomy. These gatherings were not merely social events, but vital expressions of identity and resistance. You might smile to learn that during some festivals, locals creatively poke fun at colonial legacies, staging mock trials of historical figures, or playfully debating whether a French baguette could ever replace the beloved taro root. Language, of course, remained both a bridge and a barrier. Some islanders remained fiercely protective of their mother tongues, wary of losing them to the dominant colonial languages. Efforts to document and revitalize endangered languages have been ongoing, with elders passing stories and songs to younger generations. Schools sometimes faced the tricky task of balancing national curriculum standards with local language instruction, a juggling act that occasionally drew chuckles from educators unprepared for such linguistic variety. The interplay between modern governance and custom created fascinating scenarios too. For instance, land ownership, central to many custom practices, conflicted with Western legal concepts. Resolving these tensions required patience and creative solutions, often mediated by community leaders who could navigate both worlds. The resulting legal pluralism, where formal law and customary law coexist, has been praised for preserving identity but criticized for complexity. All the while, Vanuatu's people continued to embody their island's gentle spirit, welcoming outsiders with warm smiles, sharing stories that weave past and present, and celebrating a cultural diversity that felt less like a challenge and more like a gift. As you imagine yourself walking through a bustling village market or sitting by a fire listening to a storyteller weaving tales in Bislima, you sense the heartbeat of a nation embracing its many voices, harmonizing difference into a unique symphony. So as the night deepens, let the idea of this peaceful, diverse nation settle softly in your mind, a place where unity is crafted not by forcing sameness, but by weaving together countless threads into a resilient and beautiful whole. Vanuatu's journey reminds us that cultural complexity, when met with respect and wisdom, becomes a source of strength rather than division. And as we continue, you'll discover how the charm and quirks of this island nation shaped its political landscape and everyday life in surprising ways. As you settle deeper into the rhythm of Vanuatu's story, you begin to see the nation's unique charm unfold, a place where volcanic mountains rise sharply from the sea and traditions simmer alongside the challenges of modern governance. Nation building here has never been a straightforward task. Instead, it's been a delicate balancing act, mixing ancient customs with contemporary politics and blending local quirks with the expectations of the international community. The result, a country that faces its challenges with a kind of endearing resilience and humor that feels almost like a warm island breeze, sometimes unpredictable but always refreshing. One of the most memorable challenges has been managing the impact of natural disasters. Vanuatu sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire, meaning volcanic eruptions. And cyclones are more than just occasional threats, they're part of daily life. In 1995, the eruption of the Yasur volcano reminded everyone that nature is a powerful force not to be ignored. Yet even as homes were rebuilt and communities relocated, local customs played a central role in recovery, with traditional ceremonies performed to appease spirits and bring healing. Outsiders sometimes struggle to understand how these rituals coexist with disaster relief efforts. But for the Ni Vanuatu, it's simply a way of life, an intertwining of the spiritual and the practical. Scholars still debate how these cultural practices influence disaster resilience, but few deny their importance in maintaining social cohesion. Politics in Vanuatu also carries its share of fascinating idiosyncrasies. The country's parliamentary system, influenced by British models but adapted to local contexts, often sees lively debates and shifting alliances that might make a political analyst chuckle or shake their head in confusion. Coalitions can be fragile, and at times politicians have been known to change party allegiance with a frequency that keeps everyone on their toes. Yet beneath this apparent unpredictability lies a system deeply rooted in consensus, building and respect for community voices, echoing the traditional decision-making processes that have long guided village life. A particularly quirky political tradition involves the role of chiefs. While the modern state governs through elected officials, customary chiefs still wield significant influence, especially in rural areas. Their authority in matters of land marriage and social conduct is recognized officially, creating a fascinating duality between formal government structures and traditional leadership. Sometimes this duality leads to humorous situations, like when a chief and a local MP both claim to represent the same community, each hosting separate, equally festive ceremonies. It's a balancing act that Vanuatu navigates with grace, reminding us that modernity need not erase tradition. Economic development, too, has its charms and challenges. Vanuatu's economy relies heavily on agriculture, tourism, and offshore finance sectors that must continually adapt to both global trends and local needs. While tourism brings welcome income, it also raises questions about cultural preservation and environmental sustainability, a familiar dilemma for many island nations. Ni Vanuatu communities often advocate for custom tourism, a form of travel that respects and highlights traditional ways of life rather than overshadowing them. Visitors might find themselves invited to witness ancient dances or participate in customary ceremonies, creating meaningful cultural exchanges rather than mere sightseeing. Perhaps one of the most endearing aspects of Vanuatu's national life is its people's ability to find humor amid complexity. Whether it's a village elder telling tall tales about colonial officials who got lost in the jungle, or a local politician delivering speeches peppered with island slang and playful jabs, there's a spirit of light-heartedness that infuses daily life. It's a reminder that history and politics, while serious, are also human stories filled with quirks and laughter. So, as you imagine this dynamic nation full of contrasts and colorful personalities, remember that Vanuatu's story is not just about survival, but about thriving, celebrating uniqueness, adapting with humor, and building a future rooted in both tradition and innovation. The island's charm lies not in perfection, but in the graceful way it embraces its challenges, turning potential obstacles into opportunities for community and growth. Now, as the evening deepens and the ocean's whisper lulls you further into this story, you arrive at a moment where Vanuatu steps fully into its place on the global stage, a proud, peaceful nation embracing its cultural richness while navigating the complexities of the modern world. Imagine international conferences where delegates from this small island country speak confidently in 3 languages, sharing insights rooted not only in economic development, but in a deep respect for community and environment. You might smile knowing that Vanuatu, despite its size, has become a vital voice in Pacific affairs, climate change advocacy, and cultural preservation. Cultural celebrations remain a heartbeat of the nation's identity. Annual festivals draw visitors and locals alike, bursting with traditional dances, vibrant costumes, and stories that ripple through generations. The John Frum cargo cult, which once puzzled outsiders, continues to thrive as a living tradition, its annual ceremonies attracting curious visitors and serving as a reminder of resilience and hope in the face of change. And in villages, custom practices still govern social life, offering a steady compass amid rapid modernization. Economically, Vanuatu balances traditional agriculture and fishing with burgeoning tourism and international finance sectors. While challenges like environmental vulnerability and infrastructure needs persist, community-driven initiatives often blend modern solutions with custom wisdom, proving that innovation need not erase tradition. For example, eco-tourism projects educate visitors on local culture while supporting conservation efforts, a win-win that honors both heritage and sustainability. Politically, the nation continues to juggle modern governance with respect for customary chiefs, a delicate dance reflecting its layered identity. This coexistence sometimes surprises outsiders but works as a testament to Vanuatu's ability to harmonize diversity. The country's trilingualism remains a symbol of unity amidst difference, a practical and poetic embrace of its history. Historians still debate the long-term effects of colonial duality on Vanuatu's development, pondering whether independence might have come sooner without the condominium's pandemonium. Yet most agree that this unique history forged a resilient, adaptable people with a keen sense of humor and an extraordinary capacity for peaceful coexistence. As you let these thoughts settle, picture yourself in a quiet village, the sunset painting the sky in soft hues, while stories of ancestors and dreams for the future mingle in the warm evening air. Vanuatu's journey is far from over, but its heart beats strong, rooted in cultural diversity, enriched by peaceful struggle and shining with hope. Tonight, as the gentle ocean breeze caresses your skin and the stars twinkle softly above, let the story of Vanuatu's journey to independence and its embrace of cultural diversity settle deep into your thoughts. Remember the quiet strength of the Ni Vanuatu people, how they navigated the odd pandemonium of colonial rule with humor and grace, how cargo cults like John Frum blended hope and tradition into living symbols of resilience, and how leaders like Father Walter Lini gently guided their nation toward freedom with respect and wisdom. Think of the colorful languages, the dances that speak in footsteps, and the elders who keep ancient customs alive amid modern challenges. Let the calm patience of peaceful struggle, the joyful celebration of unity in diversity, and the enduring charm of a nation forged by both tradition and change soothe your mind as you drift further into sleep. Feel the warmth of the islands, the soft pulse of community, and the promise of tomorrow resting quietly beneath the waves. Good night, and may these stories carry you gently through the night, wrapping you in the comforting embrace of history's softest whispers.